Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Golden Child's Shadow. Tyler Morrison had always lived in someone else's shadow, but never had he imagined it would be his ex-wife's. As he sat in his childhood bedroom at 32, staring at the faded baseball trophies that once meant everything to his father, the irony wasn't lost on him. The same man who'd missed every one of his games now treated Cassie Rivera like the daughter he'd never had. The Morrison family had built their fortune in construction, starting with Tyler's grandfather, who turned a small roofing business into Morrison Construction, one of the most respected firms in Colorado. Tyler's father, Frank Morrison, had expanded it into commercial development, creating a legacy worth millions. Tyler had grown up expecting to inherit not just the business, but his father's respect. Instead, he'd watched both slip away like sand through his fingers. The divorce had been brutal. Cassie had cheated with Derek Vaughn, a smooth-talking real estate developer who'd swept her off her feet with promises of a lifestyle Tyler's steady engineer salary couldn't provide. What cut deeper than the betrayal was his family's reaction. His mother, Linda, had immediately taken Cassie's side, claiming Tyler had been emotionally distant and too focused on work. His father had been even worse, treating the divorce like Tyler had failed at the one job that mattered, keeping a woman happy. "You let a good one slip away, son," Frank had said the day the papers were finalized. "Cassie's got class. She understands business, understands people. You could have learned something from her." Tyler remembered gripping his coffee mug so hard he'd thought it might shatter. Cassie understood business, all right. She understood how to charm Frank into giving her a job as community liaison for Morrison Construction, a position that didn't exist before her and came with a salary that made Tyler's stomach turn. She understood how to convince Linda that she was still family, still deserving of birthday gifts and holiday invitations. Most of all, she understood how to make Tyler feel like a stranger in his own home. The arrangement had started 6 months after the divorce. Tyler had been struggling with rent on his apartment, his savings depleted by legal fees and starting over. When Frank offered him his old room back in exchange for helping with expenses, Tyler had swallowed his pride. $900 a month to live in his childhood bedroom, while his ex-wife collected checks from his family's business and played the perfect daughter-in-law at Sunday dinners. Now, 2 years later, Tyler watched through his window as Derek's silver BMW pulled into the driveway. Derek stepped out first, tall, tanned, with the kind of confident swagger that came from never having to work for anything. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Tyler made in a month, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the Colorado wind. He moved around the car to open the passenger door for Cassie, his hand settling possessively on the small of her back as she emerged. Cassie looked exactly like the woman Tyler had fallen in love with 8 years ago, and nothing like the wife he'd lost. Her auburn hair was longer now, styled in loose waves that caught the afternoon light. She wore a cream-colored dress that hugged her curves, paired with heels that clicked authoritatively on the Morrison stone walkway. She carried herself differently now, chin up, shoulders back like she owned the world. Or at least owned the Morrison family. Tyler's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Dinner at 6. "Cassie has big news. Dress nice." He stared at the message, feeling the familiar burn of anger in his chest. Cassie had big news. Of course she did. Everything was always about Cassie now. Her promotion at work, her new apartment with Derek, her volunteer work with the hospital charity board. All topics that dominated Morrison family conversations, while Tyler might as well have been invisible. What they didn't know was that Tyler had big news too. For the past 18 months, he'd been planning. Not the kind of half-baked revenge fantasy that sustained him through sleepless nights, but something real. Something that would make them all understand exactly what they'd lost when they chose Cassie over their own blood. Tyler had learned patience in the Army before college, and he'd learned strategy in his engineering program. But most importantly, he'd learned about people in the 2 years since his divorce. He'd learned that everyone had pressure points, weak spots where the right application of force could bring down even the strongest structure. He'd spent months mapping those weak spots in everyone he'd once called family. Frank Morrison's greatest fear wasn't financial ruin. He'd survived the 2008 crash and come out stronger. His greatest fear was irrelevance, being forgotten, having his legacy crumble. Linda Morrison's weakness was her image, her need to be seen as the perfect mother and wife by their social circle. Cassie's vulnerability was her desperate need for security, for the lifestyle she'd grown up without and would do anything to maintain. And Derek Vaughn? Derek's weakness was his arrogance. He'd built his success on other people's trust, on handshake deals and promises backed by nothing but his charm. Tyler had spent months learning everything about Derek's business, his methods, his clients. What he discovered had given him the foundation for something beautiful in its simplicity. As Tyler watched Derek help Cassie with her coat on the front steps, he felt something shift inside him. The hurt, the anger, the desperate need for his family's approval. It all crystallized into something cold and sharp. Tonight will be the last time he played the role of the failed son, the bitter ex-husband, the disappointment who couldn't hold onto a good woman. Tonight, Tyler Morrison would begin to take back everything that had been stolen from him. And by the time he was finished, the people who betrayed him would wish they'd never heard his name. Chapter 2. The Last Supper. The Morrison dining room had always been a stage for power plays, but tonight it felt more like a courtroom. Tyler sat in his usual spot, the chair farthest from his father, closest to the kitchen where he could help his mother serve dinner like some kind of hired help. Across from him sat Cassie and Derek, positioned where the good children belonged, close enough for Frank to beam at them with paternal pride. Linda had outdone herself with dinner. The table groaned under the weight of herb-crusted lamb, roasted vegetables, and the good china that only came out for special occasions. Tyler noticed the irony. His mother treated Derek's presence like Christmas morning, while Tyler hadn't raided the good china since high school graduation. So, Frank said, carving the lamb with theatrical precision, "Cassie tells me you two have some exciting news to share." Derek reached over and took Cassie's hand, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture so practiced it made Tyler's teeth ache. "We wanted to share with family first," Derek said, his voice carrying just the right blend of humility and excitement. "Family." Tyler bit back the urge to laugh. Derek Vaughn, who'd met these people exactly twice before tonight, calling them family, while Tyler, who'd spent 32 years earning that title, might as well have been the mailman. "We're engaged," Cassie announced, holding up her left hand to display a diamond that caught the chandelier light like a small star. "Derek proposed last weekend during our trip to Aspen." The eruption of congratulations drowned out any chance Tyler might have had to respond. Not that he'd planned to. He watched his mother leap up to embrace Cassie, watched his father pump Derek's hand with the enthusiasm he'd never shown for any of Tyler's achievements. The diamond was impressive, probably 3 carats, flawless, the kind of ring that announced to the world that Derek Vaughn was a man who could provide. "Let me see that ring," Linda gushed, taking Cassie's hand like she was examining a holy relic. "Oh, honey, it's absolutely gorgeous. Derek, you have exquisite taste." "Only the best for Cassie," Derek replied smoothly. "She deserves everything beautiful in this world." Tyler caught the subtle emphasis on everything, the way Derek's eyes flicked toward him for just a moment. The message was clear. "I can give her what you couldn't." Frank raised his wine glass, his face flushed with pleasure. "To Derek and Cassie, welcome to the family, son." Son. The word hit Tyler like a physical blow. His father, who'd called him Tyler or boy for as long as he could remember, had just called another man's son. A man who'd been screwing his actual son's wife behind his back, who'd helped destroy Tyler's marriage, who was now being welcomed into the Morrison family with open arms. "Actually," Frank continued, his voice taking on the ceremonial tone he used for important business announcements, "this calls for more than just congratulations." Tyler watched his father reach into his jacket pocket and pull out a set of car keys. Not just any keys, BMW keys, attached to a leather fob with the Morrison Construction logo embossed in gold. "Cassie, my dear," Frank said, standing and walking around the table to present the keys with a flourish. "I know you've been taking the bus to work, and that's just not acceptable for a Morrison family member. Consider this our engagement gift. Tyler felt the world tilt sideways. His father, who'd made him buy his own car at 16, who'd refused to co-sign for Tyler's college loans, who'd never given him anything without strings attached, had just handed his ex-wife the keys to a BMW. "Frank, I can't accept this," Cassie protested, but Tyler could see the calculation behind her wide eyes. She was already imagining herself behind the wheel, already thinking about what this meant for her status at work in their social circle. "Nonsense." Frank waved away her objections. "Your family. More than that, you're going to be Derek's wife, and Derek's been invaluable to our expansion into commercial real estate. Consider it a business investment." Derek's grin was predatory. "That's incredibly generous, Mr. Morrison. Cassie's been talking about getting a reliable car." Reliable. Tyler's hands clenched under the table. His ex-wife was getting a luxury car for being engaged to another man, while Tyler drove a 10-year-old Honda with 200,000 miles on it. Linda clapped her hands together. "Oh, this is wonderful. We should start planning the wedding immediately. Have you thought about venues? I know the country club would be perfect, and I'm on the event committee." Tyler watched his mother transform into full wedding planning mode, her voice rising with excitement as she rattled off ideas for flowers, catering, guest lists. She was more animated than he'd seen her in years, more engaged than she'd been when Tyler had graduated summa cum laude from Colorado State, more excited than when he'd landed his job at Denver Engineering Solutions. "What do you think, Tyler?" The question came from Cassie, and Tyler realized the entire table was looking at him expectantly. He'd been so lost in his own thoughts that he'd missed the conversation entirely. "I'm sorry, what?" "The wedding," Derek said, his tone patient but condescending, like he was speaking to a child. "We were discussing whether to have it here in Denver or in Cassie's hometown. I thought you might have an opinion, given your history." History? Like their 8-year relationship, their 3-year marriage, the house they'd bought together, the future they planned. Like all of it was just ancient history, irrelevant to the important business of planning Cassie's new life. Tyler looked around the table at the faces watching him. His mother's expression was concerned but distant, like she was worried he might cause a scene. His father looked impatient, already moving past Tyler's opinion to more important matters. Derek's smile was sharp, challenging, daring Tyler to object. And Cassie looked at him with something that might have been pity. The same look she'd given him the day she'd asked for the divorce, when she'd explained that she'd grown apart from him, that Derek made her feel alive in ways Tyler never could. She was looking at him like he was broken, like he was something to be managed rather than considered. "I think," Tyler said slowly, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest, "that you should do whatever makes you happy, Cassie. You've certainly shown you're good at that." The table went quiet for a moment, the subtext of his words hanging in the air like smoke. Then Derek laughed, a rich sound that filled the awkward silence. "Well said. Happiness is what it's all about, isn't it?" Frank cleared his throat and turned to Tyler, his expression shifting from celebratory to businesslike. "Speaking of happiness, son, there's something we need to discuss. The rent situation." Tyler felt his stomach drop. Here it was, the real reason for tonight's dinner theater. The engagement announcement was just the opening act. With Cassie joining the family officially, Frank continued, "And Derek bringing his business connections to our projects, we're going to need to restructure some things around here." "Restructure?" Tyler asked, though he already knew where this was heading. "Your room," Linda said gently, as if speaking softly would make the blow land easier. "We're going to need it for Derek and Cassie when they visit. You understand." Tyler looked around the table again. His parents, his ex-wife, and her new fiancé, all watching him like they were waiting for him to thank them for the privilege of being evicted from his childhood home. "So, where am I supposed to live?" he asked. "There are plenty of nice apartments in town," Frank said dismissively. "A man your age should have his own place anyway." This arrangement was always temporary. Temporary. 2 years of paying $900 a month to live in his own childhood home. 2 years of watching his ex-wife collect paychecks from his family's business. 2 years of playing the grateful son for people who treated him like a burden, and it had all been temporary. The rent's due Sunday, Frank continued, his tone shifting from paternal to businesslike. $900, as usual. After that, we'll give you 30 days to find somewhere else. Tyler felt something cold settle in his chest. Something final and irrevocable, like ice forming over a deep pond. He looked at his father, the man who'd taught him to throw a baseball, who'd brought him to construction sites as a boy, who'd once told him that Morrison Construction would be his legacy, and realized that man was gone. In his place sat a stranger who cared more about impressing his son's ex-wife than protecting his own blood. "Congratulations," Tyler said finally, standing up from the table. "On the engagement, on the car, on finding yourselves such a wonderful new family member." He pulled out his wallet and counted out $900 in cash, placing it on the table next to his untouched dinner. "There's your rent. Consider it my wedding gift." "Tyler," Linda started, her voice taking on the tone she'd used when he was a child throwing a tantrum. "No," Tyler said quietly, looking at each of them in turn. "You've made your choice. All of you. You chose her over me. Chose him over me. Chose everyone over me. I understand now." He walked to the hallway closet and pulled out his jacket, feeling their eyes on his back like physical weight. When he turned around, they were all still sitting there, his parents looking uncomfortable, Derek smirking, Cassie watching him with that same pitying expression. "Enjoy your new family," Tyler said, his hand on the door handle. "I hope they give you everything you deserve." As he stepped out into the cold Colorado night, Tyler Morrison felt the last of his old life fall away like dead skin. Behind him, through the dining room window, he could see them already moving on, already forgetting he'd ever been there. Frank was pouring more wine. Linda was examining Cassie's ring again, and Derek was probably already planning how to redecorate Tyler's room. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully erased him from their lives, replaced him with something better, something more valuable. What they didn't know was that Tyler had been planning for this moment for months. They'd just given him exactly what he needed, the moral justification to destroy everything they held dear. Tyler pulled out his phone and sent a single text message. "It's time. Execute Phase 1. Across town, wheels began to turn that would bring down the Morrison family's carefully constructed world. But Tyler wouldn't be there to watch the first dominoes fall. He had a plane to catch, a new identity to assume, and 18 months of planning to put into motion. By the time they realized what was happening, Tyler Morrison would be a ghost. And ghosts, Tyler had learned, could do terrible things to the living. Chapter 3. The Vanishing Act. Tyler drove through Denver's empty streets with the methodical precision of a man executing a carefully rehearsed plan. His Honda's engine hummed steadily as he navigated toward the storage unit he'd rented 18 months ago under the name Thomas Brennan, one of 3 false identities he'd spent the last year and a half cultivating. The storage facility sat in an industrial district where asking questions wasn't part of the customer service model. Tyler punched in his access code and drove through the opening gate, his headlights cutting through the darkness between rows of identical metal doors. Unit 247 contained everything he'd need for what came next: cash, documents, clothes, and the evidence that would serve as ammunition in the war he was about to wage. He'd learned about compartmentalization in the Army, about keeping operations separate so that the failure of one couldn't compromise the others. Tyler Morrison, the bitter ex-husband, living in his childhood bedroom, was one compartment. Thomas Brennan, the methodical architect of revenge, was another. Over the next few hours, Tyler Morrison would cease to exist, at least as far as his family was concerned. The storage unit's fluorescent light flickered to life as Tyler raised the metal door. Inside, cardboard boxes lined the walls with military precision, each labeled in his neat handwriting. Financial records, personal documents, research files, emergency supplies. In the center of the space sat a sturdy desk with a laptop, printer, and secure satellite internet connection, his mobile command center. Tyler pulled out his phone and checked the time. 9:47 p.m. Perfect. His family would be finishing dinner, probably moving to the living room for coffee and more wedding planning. They'd be riding high on their victory, drunk on the satisfaction of finally cutting him loose. They wouldn't miss him until tomorrow morning, when his absence at Sunday breakfast would be noted with relief rather than concern. He opened the box labeled personal documents and pulled out a manila envelope containing his real treasures: a Michigan driver's license for Thomas Brennan, complete with a 5-year history of address changes and vehicle registrations. A passport in the same name with stamps from business trips that had never happened. Credit cards, bank accounts, employment records, all the pieces of a life that existed only on paper but would pass any background check. Creating Thomas Brennan had taken months of careful work, and a significant investment of the money Tyler had been quietly siphoning from his own accounts. Not stealing, he wasn't the kind of man, but gradually converting his assets into untraceable forms. Gold coins purchased from different dealers across 3 states. Cash advances taken in small amounts to avoid triggering bank alerts. Cryptocurrency purchased through anonymous exchanges and converted back to cash through overseas accounts. Tyler had learned about financial invisibility from an unexpected source: his divorce attorney, who'd mentioned during a late-night strategy session that wealthy clients sometimes prepared for asset protection by creating what he called ghost entities, legal but untraceable financial structures that could hide assets from vengeful ex-spouses. Tyler had paid careful attention to that conversation. The laptop booted up with a soft chime, and Tyler logged into the encrypted communication system he'd established months ago. 3 green lights indicated that his associates were online and ready to proceed. He'd never met any of them in person. That was the beauty of the modern world. Skills could be purchased anonymously, services rendered through digital dead drops, payment made in cryptocurrency that traced back to no one. Marcus Chun was a private investigator in Los Angeles who specialized in deep background research. Over the past year, he'd compiled comprehensive files on everyone in Tyler's orbit: financial records, personal habits, business dealings, social connections, secrets that could end careers or marriages. Tyler had paid him $50,000 for information that was now worth its weight in gold. Sarah Rodriguez was a social media specialist who could create or destroy online reputations with surgical precision. She'd spent months building fake personas, creating networks of false identities that could flood the internet with information, true or false, at the touch of a button. Her services came at $30,000, but the power to control narrative in the digital age was priceless. James Patterson was the most expensive and most dangerous of Tyler's associates. A former corporate security specialist turned freelancer, Patterson provided what he diplomatically called pressure application services. Tyler had paid him $100,000 up front for a year-long contract that covered everything from surveillance to more direct forms of persuasion. Tyler opened a new message window and typed, "Phase 1 is go. Target has committed to timeline. Proceed as planned." 3 confirmations came back within minutes. Marcus would begin releasing the first wave of information tomorrow morning. Sarah would start the social media campaign by Tuesday. Patterson would implement the pressure applications throughout the week, culminating in what Tyler had codenamed the revelation the following Sunday. But tonight was about disappearance, about becoming a ghost that could haunt his family's dreams without being caught or stopped. Tyler opened the last box in his storage unit and pulled out the props for his vanishing act: a crumpled suicide note written in his own hand, complete with fingerprints and DNA evidence. A bottle of sleeping pills with his prescription label, emptied of its contents. A flash drive containing what appeared to be his final confession, explaining his depression, his guilt over the divorce, his shame at disappointing his family. Tyler had studied enough missing person cases to know that the first 48 hours were crucial. If someone disappeared without a trace, the police assumed foul play. If someone disappeared after leaving clear evidence of suicidal intent, they assumed death and focused their search efforts on recovery rather than rescue. By the time they figured out that no body would ever be found, Tyler would be long gone. He placed the suicide note on his childhood desk, weighing it down with the empty pill bottle. The note was a masterpiece of misdirection, confessing to gambling debts that didn't exist, apologizing for being a burden to his family, expressing hope that they'd be happier without him. Every word was calculated to create guilt, to make them question their treatment of him, to plant seeds of doubt that would grow into psychological torment. The confession on the flash drive was even more sophisticated. Tyler had recorded it months ago, using voice modulation software to make himself sound depressed and desperate. In it, he admitted to feeling worthless, to resenting Cassie's success, to being jealous of Derek's confidence. He thanked his family for trying to help him, but insisted that some people were just meant to fail. It was psychological warfare, disguised as a suicide note. Tyler's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Tyler, we need to talk. Come home so we can work this out like adults." Home. Like the place they'd just evicted him from was still his home. Like there was anything left to work out after they'd chosen Derek Vaughn as their new son. Tyler deleted the message without responding and pulled out a prepaid phone he'd purchased with cash 6 months ago. He scrolled through the contacts until he found the number for Derek Vaughn's business line. Tyler had been calling it once a week for the past 3 months, always hanging up before Derek could answer, always from a different phone purchased with cash and discarded afterward. He'd been building a pattern, creating evidence of harassment that would support the narrative of his emotional breakdown. This time, Tyler let the call go to voicemail and left a message in the broken voice of a man at the end of his rope. "Derek, it's Tyler. I know I shouldn't be calling, but I need you to know that I don't blame you. You gave Cassie what I couldn't. You're a better man than me, and she deserves better. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. Take care of her, okay? She's all that matters." Tyler hung up and turned off the phone, dropping it into a trash bag with the other evidence of Tyler Morrison's final night. In 12 hours, Derek would find that message and realize it was a suicide confession. He'd call the police, probably call Frank and Linda, certainly call Cassie. They'd search Tyler's room and find a note, the pills, the flash drive. They'd piece together the story of a man who'd lost everything and couldn't live with the shame. What they wouldn't find was Tyler Morrison. By morning, he'd be driving toward the Mexican border in a car registered to Thomas Brennan, carrying cash and documents that would let him disappear for as long as necessary. He'd surface when the time was right, when his family had suffered enough to understand what they'd lost, when Derek and Cassie had been destroyed by forces they couldn't see or fight. Tyler closed the storage unit and drove toward the airport, where a red-eye flight to El Paso was waiting for Thomas Brennan. In the rearview mirror, Denver's lights faded into darkness, carrying with them the last traces of the man who'd tried so hard to earn his family's love. Tyler Morrison was dead. What remained was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. A ghost with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from watching his enemies destroy each other. As the plane lifted off into the night sky, Tyler pulled out a burner tablet and logged into a secure server one last time. In 8 hours, Marcus Chun would release the first batch of information about Derek Vaughn's business practices. In 12 hours, Sarah Rodriguez would begin flooding social media with carefully crafted rumors about Cassie's relationship with her boss. In 24 hours, James Patterson would make the first move in a chess game that would end with the complete destruction of everyone who'd betrayed him. Tyler smiled as he watched Denver disappear beneath the clouds. His family thought they'd gotten rid of their biggest problem. They had no idea that their worst nightmare was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Haunting Begins. Frank Morrison had built his empire on the principle that problems could be solved with money, influence, or intimidation. He'd never encountered a problem that simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and the growing certainty that something terrible was unfolding beyond his control. It had been 4 days since Tyler's disappearance, and the Denver Police Department had shifted from treating it as a missing person case to what Detective Rodriguez diplomatically called probable suicide with delayed recovery. The note, the pills, the desperate voicemail to Derek, all the evidence pointed to a young man who'd finally succumbed to the pressure of his failures. Frank sat in his oak-paneled office at Morrison Construction, staring at the police report that had arrived that morning. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, but it painted a picture that made his stomach turn. Tyler Morrison, age 32, suffering from depression related to divorce and family estrangement, had taken his own life somewhere in the Colorado wilderness. Recovery efforts were ongoing, but would be scaled back after 72 hours unless new evidence emerged. The guilt was eating Frank alive. He'd raised Tyler to be strong, to handle adversity, to never give up. Where'd he gone wrong? When had his son become so weak that a divorce and some hard truths about life could drive him to suicide? A knock on his office door interrupted his brooding. "Come in." Linda entered, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the expression of a woman who'd aged 5 years and 4 days. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she approached his desk. "Frank, we need to talk. About Tyler, about the business, about everything." Frank gestured to the chair across from his desk, but Linda remained standing. She placed the envelope in front of him with the careful precision of someone delivering a bomb. "What's this?" "Open it." Frank undid the clasp and pulled out a thick stack of photographs, financial documents, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. The top photograph showed Derek Vaughn entering a downtown hotel with a woman who definitely wasn't Cassie. The timestamp indicated it was taken 3 days ago, after the engagement announcement. "Where did you get these?" Frank asked, his voice tight. "They were delivered to the house this morning. No return address, no note, just these pictures and documents." Linda's voice cracked slightly. "Frank, if Tyler saw these, if he knew Derek was cheating on Cassie." Frank flipped through the photographs with growing horror. Derek with multiple women, Derek meeting with clients at strip clubs, Derek signing contracts in hotel rooms while half-dressed escorts waited in the background. The financial documents were even worse. Records showing Derek's real estate development company was leveraged beyond any reasonable limit, held together by shell companies and offshore accounts that existed only on paper. But the most damning evidence was a series of recorded phone conversations between Derek and various business associates. Frank pulled out the small digital recorder that had been included in the envelope and pressed play. Derek's voice was unmistakable. "The Morrison deal is golden. The old man's so desperate to impress me he'll sign anything I put in front of him. We get him to invest in the Phoenix project, then move the money through the Cayman accounts before he figures out it's all bullshit." Frank felt the blood drain from his face. The Phoenix project, Derek had pitched it to him just last week as a guaranteed return on investment. Morrison Construction had already committed $3 million based on Derek's promises and financial projections. Another voice on the recording, gruffer, less polished. "What about the son? Tyler?" Word as he's been asking questions. Derek laughed, a sound that made Frank's skin crawl. "Tyler's not a problem anymore. The divorce broke him, and Daddy Dearest is so embarrassed by his failure that he'd rather believe I'm the golden boy. Tyler could have evidence of me murdering puppies, and the old man would still choose me over his own son." Frank stopped the recording and looked up at Linda, who was crying silently. She'd heard it all before, had probably listened to every damning word while Frank was at the office trying to distract himself from Tyler's disappearance. "How long have you known?" Frank asked. "Since this morning. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you, whether we should call the police, whether—" She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "Frank, what if Tyler didn't kill himself? What if he found out about Derek and tried to stop him?" The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Derek Vaughn, the man they'd welcomed into their family, the man they'd chosen over their own son, was a con artist who'd been playing them from the beginning. Worse, if Tyler had discovered Derek's true nature and tried to expose him. Frank's phone rang, jarring him out of his dark thoughts. The caller ID showed Morrison Construction's main line. "Mr. Morrison?" His secretary's voice was strained. "There are some men here to see you. They say they're from the FBI." Frank felt the world tilt sideways. "Send them up." 2 agents entered his office 5 minutes later. A tall, thin man with prematurely gray hair who introduced himself as Agent Collins, and a compact woman with sharp eyes who showed her badge and said she was Agent Park. They carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who were used to having their questions answered immediately and completely. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Collins said, settling into the chair across from Frank's desk, "we're investigating some irregularities in several real estate development projects throughout Colorado and Arizona. Your name has come up in connection with one of our persons of interest. Who? Frank asked, though he already knew the answer. Agent Park consulted her notes. Derek Vaughn. We understand you've entered into several business arrangements with Mr. Vaughn over the past year. Frank glanced at Linda, who had gone pale. Derek was engaged to my former daughter-in-law. We've done some work together, yes. $3 million in the Phoenix Commercial Development Project, Agent Collins said. It wasn't a question. We've been tracking the money flow through that particular venture. Mr. Morrison, I'm afraid you've been the victim of a sophisticated fraud scheme. The next hour passed in a blur of questions, explanations, and a gradual realization that the Morrison family had been systematically targeted and exploited. Derek Vaughn wasn't his real name. He was actually Derek Walsh, a con artist with a history of romance scams and investment fraud stretching back 15 years. He'd researched the Morrison family for months before making contact with Cassie, learning their vulnerabilities and crafting the perfect approach. The pattern is always the same, Agent Park explained. He targets recently divorced women from wealthy families, gains their trust, then uses the romantic relationship to access family money. Your former daughter-in-law wasn't his first victim, and she wouldn't have been his last. What about Cassie? Linda asked. Does she know? Agent Collins shook his head. In our experience, the romantic targets are usually genuine victims. Mr. Walsh is very good at making women believe he loves them. Ms. Rivera has probably been manipulated as much as you have. Frank felt a new kind of rage building in his chest. Not just anger at Derek Walsh, for stealing from them, but fury at himself for being so easily manipulated. The man had played on Frank's ego, his desire to be seen as successful and important, his need to mentor a younger man who appreciated his wisdom. Frank had been used as thoroughly as if he'd been hypnotized. There's something else, Agent Park said carefully. We understand your son, Tyler Morrison, recently went missing under suspicious circumstances. Tyler killed himself, Linda said brokenly. He left a note. Pills, the police said. Mrs. Morrison, Agent Collins interrupted gently. The timing of your son's disappearance, combined with evidence that Derek Walsh was about to be exposed, raises some questions. Did Tyler ever express suspicions about Walsh? Did he ever mention investigating his background? Frank thought back to the past few months, trying to remember Tyler's behavior around Derek. There had been tension, certainly, but Frank had attributed it to jealousy and resentment. Had Tyler actually been trying to warn them? Had his own son been trying to protect them while Frank pushed him away in favor of a con artist? I don't know, Frank admitted. I thought Tyler was just bitter about the divorce. I didn't listen to him. The agents exchanged glances. Mr. Morrison, we're going to need you to provide us with all your financial records related to Derek Walsh. Phone records, emails, contracts, everything. And we're going to need to speak with Ms. Rivera as soon as possible. After the agents left, Frank and Linda sat in silence, the weight of their mistakes pressing down on them like a physical force. Their son was dead, their family's money was gone, and the man they'd chosen over Tyler was a criminal who'd been using them from the beginning. But the cruelest irony was yet to come. Frank's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check the Morrison Construction employee portal. Password, blood runs cold. Frank opened his laptop and navigated to the company's internal website, his hands shaking as he typed in the password. A new folder had appeared in the shared documents section, titled Tyler's Investigation. Inside were dozens of files, photographs, financial records, recorded conversations, background checks, documenting Derek Walsh's criminal history and his systematic infiltration of the Morrison family. Tyler had known. For months, Tyler had been building a case against Derek, gathering evidence, trying to protect his family from a predator they'd welcomed with open arms. The timestamps on the files showed Tyler had been working on this investigation right up until the night he disappeared. Frank opened the last file in the folder, a video message dated 3 days ago. Tyler's face filled the screen, but this wasn't the broken, defeated man Frank remembered from their last dinner. This Tyler was calm, focused, and absolutely furious. If you're watching this, Tyler said, looking directly into the camera, Then Derek has made his move, and you've finally realized what kind of man you chose over your own son. I've spent the last 18 months documenting his crimes, building a case that should put him in prison for the rest of his life. But I'm not going to be the one to present it. Tyler leaned closer to the camera, his eyes hard as winter stones. You want Derek Vaughn and your family instead of me? You want to trust a criminal over your own blood? Then you can deal with the consequences. I'm done protecting people who won't protect me. The video ended, leaving Frank staring at his son's face frozen on the screen. Tyler wasn't dead. Tyler was out there somewhere, watching them discover the truth he'd tried to warn them about, watching them pay the price for their betrayal. Linda came around the desk to watch the video, her hand covering her mouth as Tyler's words sank in. He knew, she whispered. He was trying to save us, and we threw him away. Frank's phone rang again. This time it was Derek Walsh, calling from what was probably a burner phone, his voice panicked and desperate. Frank, I need your help. There are FBI agents in my apartment. My accounts have been frozen, and Cassie won't answer her phone. Someone's been spreading lies about me, ruining everything I've built. Frank looked at the evidence spread across his desk, at the video of his son's cold fury, at the investigation that proved Derek was everything Tyler had tried to warn them about. Tyler, Frank said quietly. What about Tyler? Frank, you're not making sense. You destroyed my son's life, and now he's destroying yours. Frank felt a strange sense of pride mixed with his grief. And you know what, Derek? You deserve everything that's coming to you. Frank hung up the phone and deleted Derek's number from his contacts. Then he called Detective Rodriguez and told her she needed to reopen Tyler Morrison's missing person case, not as a suicide, but as the disappearance of a man who discovered the truth about the people his family had chosen over him. Somewhere out there, Tyler was watching. Somewhere out there, his son was orchestrating the destruction of everyone who'd betrayed him. Frank Morrison had built his empire on the principle that actions had consequences. Now, he was learning that sometimes those consequences came from the people you hurt the most. The ghost of Tyler Morrison had come home to haunt them all. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. Cassie Rivera had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to navigate social situations with the grace of someone who understood that relationships were just another form of currency. That skill had served her well throughout her life. First in escaping the poverty of her childhood, then in building a career, and finally in positioning herself within the Morrison family sphere of influence. But now, as she sat in the FBI field office being questioned about her fiancé's criminal activities, she realized that her greatest strength had also been her greatest weakness. Agent Park slid another photograph across the metal table. This one showing Derek entering a Las Vegas hotel with a blonde woman who looked barely old enough to drink. Can you identify the woman in this photograph? Ms. Rivera? Cassie stared at the image, her engagement ring feeling suddenly heavy on her finger. I've never seen her before. This was taken 2 weeks ago, while Mr. Walsh was supposedly attending a real estate conference in Phoenix. The woman's name is Jennifer Caldwell. She's 23 years old and was recently divorced from a tech entrepreneur worth about $12 million. The pattern was becoming clear with each new photograph, each new piece of evidence the FBI laid before her. Derek hadn't been attending business conferences. He'd been cultivating his next mark, spinning the same web of lies and charm that he'd used to catch her. The realization should have made her angry, but instead she felt only a cold, creeping dread. Ms. Rivera, Agent Collins said gently, we believe you're a victim here as much as anyone else. Derek Walsh is a professional con artist who specializes in exploiting recently divorced women from wealthy families. His interest in you was never personal. It was strategic. Cassie closed her eyes, trying to process the implications. Every moment of their relationship, their first meeting at the charity gala, his pursuit of her after her divorce, his seemingly genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings, had been calculated. She'd thought she was using her connection to Derek to secure her position with the Morrison family, but Derek had been using her to get to them. How long, she asked. How long what? How long was he planning this? When did he first target me? Agent Park consulted her notes. Our investigation suggests Walsh began researching your family situation approximately 6 months before your divorce was finalized. He knew about your marriage problems before you did. The words hit Cassie like a physical blow. Derek hadn't swooped in to rescue her from an unhappy marriage. He'd orchestrated the end of that marriage. She thought back to their early conversations, how he'd seemed to understand her frustrations with Tyler, how he'd encouraged her to want more from life, to expect more from a partner. Did he cause my divorce? Agent Collins leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but professional. We can't prove direct interference in your marriage, Ms. Rivera. But Walsh has a pattern of identifying vulnerable relationships and applying pressure at strategic points. Small suggestions, seemingly innocent observations, gradual erosion of trust and satisfaction. It's psychological manipulation disguised as support. Cassie felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Not just the relationship with Derek, but everything that had followed from it. Her job at Morrison Construction, her acceptance into the family, her entire sense of identity over the past 2 years. All of it had been built on Derek's manipulation. There's something else we need to discuss, Agent Park said, her tone becoming more serious. Tyler Morrison's disappearance. What can you tell us about his relationship with Derek Walsh? Cassie shifted uncomfortably in her chair. He was jealous, bitter about the divorce. He never accepted that Derek and I were together. Did Tyler ever express specific concerns about Derek's business practices? Did he ever accuse Derek of anything beyond personal issues? Cassie thought back to their interactions over the past year. Tyler had always been hostile toward Derek, but she'd attributed it to wounded male pride. Had there been something more? Had Tyler been trying to warn her about something she'd been too infatuated to see? He said Derek was too good to be true, Cassie admitted reluctantly. He said men like Derek didn't just fall in love with divorced women unless they wanted something. I thought he was just being cruel. Agent Collins exchanged a glance with his partner. Ms. Rivera, we have evidence that Tyler Morrison was conducting his own investigation into Derek Walsh's background. He'd been gathering information for months before his disappearance. A new fear crept into Cassie's chest. You think Derek did something to Tyler? We think Tyler discovered information that could have exposed Derek's operation. Whether Derek acted on that threat, or whether Tyler chose to disappear for his own reasons, is still under investigation. Cassie's phone buzzed on the table between them, the screen lighting up with a text from an unknown number. Agent Park nodded permission for her to read it. Check your email. Password, worth it. A friend who tried to warn you. Cassie felt her blood turn to ice. She recognized the phrase. It was what Frank Morrison had said at dinner the night Tyler disappeared, the cruel words that had justified choosing Derek over his own son. Because she's worth it. Ms. Rivera? Agent Collins prompted. I need to check my email. I think Tyler's trying to tell us something. Agent Park pulled out a laptop and opened an internet browser, sliding it across to Cassie. Her hands shook as she logged into her email account and typed in the password. A new folder had appeared in her inbox, labeled The Truth About Derek Walsh. Inside were dozens of emails, all from Tyler's personal account, all dated over the past 18 months, but never sent. Each one contained pieces of Derek's real background, criminal records, court documents, testimonials from previous victims. Tyler had been building a comprehensive case against Derek while Cassie had been planning her wedding. The first email was dated 3 months after Cassie and Derek had started dating. Cassie, I know you won't want to hear this, but Derek Vaughn isn't who he claims to be. I've been doing some research, and there are inconsistencies in his background that worry me. I'm not trying to ruin your happiness. I'm trying to protect you from someone who might be using you. Please be careful. Tyler. The emails continued chronologically, each one more urgent than the last, as Tyler uncovered more evidence of Derek's criminal history. Bank fraud in California, romance scams in Florida, identity theft in Texas. Derek Walsh had been running cons for 15 years, and Tyler had documented every crime. The final email was dated the day before Tyler's disappearance. Cassie, by the time you read this, Derek will probably have made his move on the Morrison family money. I've given you 18 months to see through his act, but you're too invested in the fantasy to accept the truth. I won't let him destroy my family to subsidize your fairy tale. I'm sorry for what's about to happen, but you chose him over everyone who tried to warn you. Live with the consequences. Tyler. Cassie read the email twice, trying to process the implications. Tyler hadn't killed himself out of depression or despair. He'd disappeared to orchestrate Derek's downfall. Everything that was happening, the FBI investigation, the exposure of Derek's crimes, the collapse of his carefully constructed identity, was Tyler's doing. "He's alive," she whispered. Agent Collins nodded grimly. "We believe so. The question is where and what he's planning next." As if summoned by their conversation, Cassie's phone rang. The caller ID showed Derek's number, and Agent Park gestured for her to answer while they listened on speaker. "Derek." Cassie's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Cassie, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Something's happening, something terrible. The FBI raided my office, they've frozen my accounts, and they're saying things about me that aren't true." Even now, even knowing what she knew, Derek's voice had the power to make her doubt the evidence in front of her. He sounded genuinely distressed, genuinely confused by the accusations against him. But Cassie had learned to recognize the difference between sincerity and performance. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are you really Derek Walsh? Are you really a con artist?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for Derek to calculate his response, to decide whether to continue the charade or cut his losses. "Cassie, sweetheart, you have to understand." She hung up the phone and looked at the agents across the table. "He's guilty of everything." Agent Park leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Rivera, we're going to need your full cooperation in building a case against Derek Walsh. That means testimony about your relationship, access to any communications between you, and a complete timeline of his interactions with the Morrison family." "What about Tyler? What happens when you find him?" Agent Collins considered the question carefully. "That depends on what he's done and what he plans to do next. Disappearing isn't a crime, and neither is conducting a private investigation. But if he's engaged in fraud, harassment, or worse, he won't hurt anyone," Cassie said with more confidence than she felt. "Tyler's not violent. He's angry, and he has every right to be, but he's not a killer." "Let's hope you're right," Agent Park said, "because right now, Tyler Morrison is the only one who knows how this story ends." As Cassie left the FBI office 2 hours later, her entire life in ruins around her, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to Tyler's old number. "I'm sorry. I should have listened. I should have trusted you. Please come home." The message was delivered, but never read. Somewhere out there, Tyler Morrison was watching his enemies destroy each other, orchestrating a revenge so complete that his family would never recover from the guilt of choosing a criminal over their own son. But Cassie had a terrible feeling that Tyler's revenge was just beginning, and that the people who'd betrayed him hadn't yet begun to pay the price for their choices. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. The Denver Police Department's Cold Case Division had seen its share of strange developments, but Detective Maria Rodriguez had never worked a case where the presumed victim appeared to be orchestrating his own investigation from beyond the grave. Tyler Morrison's suicide had been reopened as a missing person case, then reclassified as a potential homicide, and now existed in a bureaucratic limbo where nobody knew whether they were hunting for a body, a suspect, or a ghost. Rodriguez sat in interview room C across from Derek Walsh, who'd been arrested 6 hours earlier on federal fraud charges. The man who'd charmed his way into the Morrison family looked nothing like the confident real estate developer who'd been planning a wedding just a week ago. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled, and his eyes held the desperate look of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse in real time. "Mr. Walsh," Rodriguez began, consulting her notes, "I want to talk to you about Tyler Morrison." Derek's face went pale. "I already told the FBI everything I know about Tyler. He was unstable, obsessed with his ex-wife, probably suicidal. Whatever happened to him has nothing to do with me." Rodriguez opened a file folder and pulled out a photograph. Derek leaving Tyler's apartment building at 2:47 a.m. on the night Tyler disappeared. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner of the image, captured by a security camera Derek hadn't known existed. This photograph suggests otherwise. Derek stared at the image for a long moment, his composure finally cracking. "That doesn't prove anything. Maybe I want to check on him, to see if he was okay after what happened at dinner. At nearly 3 in the morning, after he'd stormed out of his parents' house and left a suicide note on his desk, Rodriguez leaned forward. "Mr. Walsh, we've recovered Tyler Morrison's laptop from his apartment. The search history shows someone accessed it after midnight on the night he disappeared. Someone who knew his passwords and deleted specific files related to your background investigation." The lie came so smoothly that Rodriguez almost believed Derek still thought he could charm his way out of trouble. "Tyler gave me his passwords months ago. He was having computer problems, asked me to help him with some files. When I heard he might hurt himself, I went over to make sure he hadn't left anything that would upset his family, such as evidence of your criminal history." Derek's lawyer, a public defender who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, finally spoke up. "Detective, unless you're charging my client with something related to Mr. Morrison's disappearance, we should focus on the federal charges he's already facing." Rodriguez ignored the lawyer and slid another photograph across the table. This one showed Derek's BMW parked at a 24-hour storage facility 40 miles outside Denver, the timestamp indicating 4:15 a.m. on the morning Tyler disappeared. "What were you storing at this facility, Mr. Walsh?" Derek's composure finally shattered completely. "I want a deal. I want immunity for anything related to Tyler Morrison, and I'll tell you everything." The lawyer tried to stop him, but Derek waved her away. "It's over anyway." Tyler made sure of that. Rodriguez activated her recorder and read Derek his rights again. "Tell me what happened that night." Derek took a shaky breath and began to speak. "Tyler had been investigating me for months. He'd figured out who I really was, compiled evidence of my previous operations, even contacted some of my former marks. He had enough to put me away for 20 years. So you killed him?" "No." Derek's voice cracked. "I went to his apartment to reason with him, to make a deal. Tyler was smart, but he was also bitter about the divorce. I thought I could convince him that destroying me would hurt Cassie too, that she didn't deserve to be humiliated when the truth came out." Rodriguez waited, letting the silence stretch until Derek felt compelled to fill it. "Tyler was waiting for me. He had all his evidence laid out on his desk, copies of everything, recordings of our conversations. He said he was going to the FBI in the morning, that he was going to make sure I spent the rest of my life in prison." "What did you do?" Derek's hands were shaking now. "I panicked. I grabbed a baseball bat from his closet, threatened him, told him I'd hurt Cassie if he went to the authorities. Tyler just laughed. He said I could kill him if I wanted, but it wouldn't matter. He'd already set everything in motion." Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. What did he mean by that? He had associates, people he'd hired to investigate me, to gather evidence, to destroy my reputation. He said whether he lived or died, my life was over. The FBI would get anonymous tips, my victims would be contacted, everything would come out. "Where's Tyler Morrison now, Mr. Walsh?" Derek met her eyes for the first time since the interview began. "I don't know. I swear on my mother's grave, I don't know." Rodriguez studied his face, looking for tells, for signs of deception. What she saw was genuine confusion mixed with terror. "I hit him," Derek continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just once with the bat. He went down hard, hit his head on the corner of his desk. There was blood, and he wasn't moving." The room went silent except for the hum of the recording equipment. Rodriguez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, but the picture they formed didn't make sense. "I checked his pulse," Derek said. "He was alive, but unconscious. I was going to call 911, but then I heard someone coming up the stairs. I panicked and ran." "Who was coming up the stairs?" "I don't know. I heard voices, multiple people, but I used a fire escape. By the time I got to my car, there was a moving truck in front of the building." Rodriguez felt her world tilt sideways. A moving truck? At 4 in the morning. Derek nodded miserably. "That's when I knew Tyler had planned this. He'd staged his own disappearance, made it look like suicide, but he had people ready to move him somewhere safe. I went to the storage facility to stash some evidence, some files that connected me to other operations. But it was too late. Tyler had already won." Rodriguez excused herself and stepped into the hallway, her mind racing. If Derek was telling the truth, then Tyler Morrison hadn't died that night. He'd been rescued by associates who'd helped him disappear. The suicide note, the pills, the emotional voicemail. All of it had been theater designed to cover his tracks while he orchestrated Derek's destruction from the shadows. She called Agent Collins and shared Derek's confession, then returned to the interview room, where Derek was staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "Mr. Walsh, you're going to be charged with assault, breaking and entering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. But if Tyler Morrison is alive, and if you help us find him, the district attorney might be willing to discuss a plea arrangement." Derek looked up with something that might have been hope. "You think he's alive?" "I think Tyler Morrison is very much alive, and I think he's just getting started." Rodriguez gathered her files and stood up. "The question is whether he's going to stop with destroying you, or whether his family is next on his list." As Rodriguez left the interview room, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Derek Walsh confessed. "Good. Now you know the truth about what happened that night. But detective, what happened to me is nothing compared to what's going to happen to the people who chose him over their own blood. T.M." Rodriguez stared at the message, feeling a chill run down her spine. Tyler Morrison wasn't just alive. He was watching, orchestrating events from somewhere beyond their reach. And if Derek Walsh's confession was any indication, Tyler's revenge was far from over. She forwarded the message to Agent Collins and added a note. "We need to put the Morrison family in protective custody. Tyler Morrison isn't the victim in this case. He's the perpetrator. And I don't think he's finished with any of them." Somewhere in the shadows, Tyler Morrison was planning the final act of his revenge. The question wasn't whether his family would pay for their betrayal. It was how much they would suffer before he was satisfied that justice had been served. Chapter 7. The Family Fractures. Frank Morrison had built Morrison Construction on the principle that a man's word was his bond, that family loyalty was sacred, and that hard work and integrity would always triumph over deception and greed. Now, sitting in his office with FBI agents, police detectives, and lawyers, he watched those principles crumble like a house built on sand. Agent Collins spread crime scene photos across Frank's mahogany desk. Images of Tyler's apartment after Derek's assault, blood spatter analysis, evidence of a struggle that painted a very different picture than the suicide they'd all believed. But the most damning evidence wasn't physical, it was digital. Tyler's computer had been accessed remotely for months, his plans monitored, and his movements tracked by people who remained ghosts in the digital landscape. "Your son is alive, Mr. Morrison," Agent Collins said without preamble. "But he's not the victim we initially thought. Tyler orchestrated his own disappearance, staged his suicide, and has been systematically destroying Derek Walsh's life from the shadows. The question is what he plans to do next." Frank studied the evidence spread before him. Financial records showing money transfers to private investigators, encrypted communications with associates whose identities remained hidden, surveillance footage of Tyler meeting with people who looked more like mercenaries than grieving family friends. His son, his supposedly weak, broken son, had assembled what could only be described as a revenge network. "How long?" Frank asked, his voice hoarse. "Based on our investigation, Tyler began planning this operation approximately 18 months ago. He's been methodical, patient, and absolutely ruthless in his execution." Linda Morrison sat in the corner of the office, her face pale and drawn. She'd aged a decade in the weeks since Tyler's disappearance, the guilt of choosing Derek over her son, eating her alive. "What do you mean, ruthless?" Detective Rodriguez consulted her notes. "Mrs. Morrison, your son didn't just gather evidence against Derek Walsh. He systematically destroyed Derek's other operations, contacted his previous victims, fed information to law enforcement agencies across multiple states. Derek wasn't just exposed, he was obliterated." Frank felt a strange mixture of pride and horror. Tyler had shown the kind of strategic thinking and ruthless determination that Frank had always hoped to see in his heir. But that intelligence and drive had been turned against the Morrison family itself. "There's more," Agent Collins continued. "We've identified several of Tyler's associates through financial forensics. Marcus Chun, a private investigator in Los Angeles, provided extensive background research on your family's vulnerabilities. Sarah Rodriguez, a digital reputation specialist, coordinated online attacks against Derek's business credibility. And James Patterson. Agent Collins paused, consulting his notes with obvious reluctance. James Patterson is what's known in certain circles as a problem solver. He specializes in corporate espionage, blackmail, and what he euphemistically calls pressure applications. Tyler paid him $100,000 for a year-long contract. Frank felt the blood drain from his face. You're saying my son hired criminals. I'm saying your son hired professionals who operate in gray areas of the law. Whether their activities were criminal depends on exactly what Tyler asked them to do. Agent Collins leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, we have reason to believe Tyler's plan is entering its final phase. Derek Walsh was just the opening act. Frank's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was listed as unknown, but Frank recognized the tone immediately. Family meeting tonight at the house. 8 p.m. Come alone or don't come at all. It's time we finish this conversation. Tyler. Detective Rodriguez saw the message and immediately began making phone calls, coordinating surveillance and backup. But Frank waved her away. No police. No FBI. No backup. Mr. Morrison, your son is a missing person who's been living under false identities for over a week. He's potentially dangerous, and we can't guarantee your safety. Frank looked at the evidence of Tyler's meticulous planning, his network of associates, his systematic destruction of Derek Walsh's life. Detective, if Tyler wanted to hurt me, I'd already be dead. He wants to talk. After what we did to him, I owe him that much. Linda looked up from her corner chair. We're going with you. Linda, no. This is between Tyler and me. This is about our family, Linda said firmly. About choices we all made. If Tyler wants to punish us, then we face it together. Agent Collins tried to object, but Frank cut him off. Tyler won't hurt his mother. Whatever he's become, whatever he's planned, he won't physically harm Linda. What Frank didn't say was that he wasn't sure Tyler would show the same restraint toward him. The evidence suggested Tyler had become someone Frank didn't recognize, cold, calculating, and absolutely merciless in pursuing his goals. The son who'd once looked up to Frank with hero worship had been replaced by a stranger who'd turned Tyler's own strategic thinking against him. That evening, Frank and Linda drove to the Morrison family home in silence. The house where Tyler had grown up, where he'd learned to ride a bike and play catch in the backyard, felt like neutral territory for a war neither side wanted to fight but couldn't avoid. Tyler was waiting for them in the living room, sitting in Frank's favorite chair like he owned the place. He looked different, leaner, harder, with the kind of confidence that came from having absolute control over a situation. He wore dark jeans and a black sweater, nothing fancy, but he carried himself like a general reviewing troops. Hello, Dad. Mom. Linda rushed toward him, tears streaming down her face, but Tyler held up a hand that stopped her mid-stride. His expression wasn't cruel, but it was distant, like he was looking at strangers who happened to share his DNA. Sit down. We have things to discuss. Frank took the couch across from Tyler, Linda beside him, and for a moment they looked like a normal family having a difficult conversation. But the tension in the room was electric, charged with the accumulated weight of betrayal, guilt, and 18 months of careful planning. You're alive, Linda said unnecessarily. Obviously, Tyler's voice was steady, controlled. Though I'm touched by how hard you looked for me after you found my suicide note. Frank winced. Tyler, you thought exactly what I wanted you to think. That your disappointment of a son had finally done everyone a favor and removed himself from the equation. Tyler leaned back in the chair, completely relaxed. How's Derek doing, by the way? I heard he's been having some legal troubles. You orchestrated his arrest, Frank said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Tyler smiled, and the expression was colder than Frank had ever seen on his son's face. I orchestrated his downfall. Derek Walsh is a criminal who is using our family to commit fraud. I simply ensured that justice was served. You hired criminals to destroy him. I hired professionals to expose him. There's a difference. Tyler's tone remained conversational, but Frank could see the steel underneath. Derek committed the crimes. I just made sure they came to light. Linda found her voice. Tyler, we were wrong. About Derek, about you, about everything. We're sorry. Tyler studied his mother, for a long moment. Are you? Are you sorry for choosing a con artist over your own son? Or are you sorry you got caught? We're sorry for hurting you, Frank said. For not listening, for not seeing what Derek really was. You tried to warn us, and we pushed you away. Yes, you did. Tyler stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where he'd grown up. Do you want to know the worst part? It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was the realization that you valued a stranger's opinion more than your own son's feelings. Frank felt the words like physical blows. Tyler, please. Tell us how to make this right. Tyler turned back to face them, his expression unreadable. You can't. What's done is done. But you can answer a question for me. Why? Why what? Why was Derek worth more to you than I was? Why was Cassie worth more? Why was everyone in the world more important than your own blood? The question hung in the air like poison gas. Frank tried to find an answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse, but the truth was ugly and inescapable. I thought Derek was successful. I thought he could teach you something about confidence, about ambition. I thought Cassie brought out the best in our family. Frank's voice cracked. I was wrong. About everything. Tyler nodded slowly. Yes, you were. And now you're going to live with the consequences of those choices. Linda leaned forward desperately. What does that mean? Tyler, what are you planning? Tyler walked back to his chair, but didn't sit down. It means Derek Walsh is going to prison for the rest of his life. It means Cassie Rivera is going to spend years in therapy, try to recover for being used by a professional manipulator. It means Morrison Construction is going to be investigated for fraud by association, and our family name is going to be dragged through every newspaper in Colorado. Frank felt his world collapsing. The business? Tyler, Morrison Construction is our legacy. Our legacy? Tyler's composure finally cracked, revealing the fury underneath. Our legacy is choosing criminals over family. Our legacy is abandoning your own son for a con artist who was stealing from us. Tyler pulled out his phone and showed them a news article dated for tomorrow morning. Morrison Construction under investigation for ties to international fraud ring. Below it was another headline. Local family son disappears after exposing criminal scheme. The story breaks tomorrow, Tyler said calmly, his mask of control back in place. Every detail of Derek's infiltration of our family, every dollar he stole, every lie he told. But the focus won't be on Derek. It'll be on the family who chose him over their own blood. Linda was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Frank felt numb, watching his life's work crumble because he'd been too proud to listen to his son's warnings. Tyler, Frank said quietly, I know you hate us. I know we deserve whatever you've planned. But your mother, my mother chose Cassie Rivera over me at every family dinner for 2 years, Tyler interrupted. My mother defended a con artist and told me I needed to be more like him. My mother treated her son's ex-wife like the daughter she'd always wanted. Tyler walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at them one final time. You wanted Derek Vaughn in your family instead of Tyler Morrison? Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. I hope it was worth it. As Tyler disappeared into the night, Frank Morrison understood that his son hadn't just faked his death. He'd been reborn as someone else entirely. Someone who would never forgive, never forget, and never stop punishing the people who'd betrayed him. The ghost of Tyler Morrison had come home to destroy everything the Morrison family had built. And there was nothing Frank could do to stop it. Chapter 8. The Wages of Sin. Cassie Rivera had thought she understood humiliation. The end of her marriage, the whispered gossip among her friends, the awkward silences when people didn't know which side to take. All of it had felt devastating at the time. But that was before she became the face of one of Colorado's biggest fraud scandals, before her personal life became tabloid fodder, before she learned what it meant to be truly destroyed. The Denver Post's expose had run with the subtlety of a nuclear bomb. Local woman's romance leads to million-dollar fraud scheme. Cassie's photo, a candid shot from the Morrison family Christmas party, was plastered across the front page next to Derek's mugshot and pictures of the FBI raiding Morrison Construction. The article painted her as either a willing accomplice or a spectacularly gullible victim, and Cassie wasn't sure which characterization was worse. She sat in her apartment, The apartment Derek had convinced her to lease in his name, leaving her with no legal protection when his assets were frozen, staring at her laptop screen. The comments section beneath the online article was a cesspool of speculation, judgment, and cruelty. Some people defended her as a victim of manipulation. Others suggested she'd been in on the scheme from the beginning. Most just seemed to enjoy watching someone else's life implode in spectacular fashion. Her phone had been ringing nonstop for 3 days. Reporters wanting comments, former friends wanting gossip, creditors wanting payment for bills Derek had promised to handle. Cassie had stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize, but that didn't stop the voicemails from accumulating like digital poison. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation, it was the private knowledge that Tyler had tried to warn her. The emails she'd found in her account, the ones Tyler had written but never sent, painted a devastating picture of a man watching someone he'd once loved destroy herself out of greed and willful blindness. Tyler had known Derek was a fraud 18 months before anyone else, and Cassie had been too infatuated with her fairy tale romance to listen. A knock at her door made Cassie freeze. She'd been ignoring visitors for days, but this knock was different, soft, respectful, almost apologetic. She looked through the peephole and saw Linda Morrison standing in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. Cassie opened the door cautiously. "Mrs. Morrison." "Hello, dear. May I come in?" Linda looked as destroyed as Cassie felt. Her usually perfect hair was unkempt. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and she carried herself like someone who'd aged a decade overnight. She wore a simple dress and flats. None of the elegant outfits that had made her the envy of the country club set. Of course, Cassie stepped aside, suddenly conscious of her own appearance. She hadn't showered in 2 days, her apartment was littered with takeout containers and empty wine bottles, and she was wearing pajamas at 3 in the afternoon. Linda set the casserole dish on the kitchen counter and turned to face Cassie with an expression of profound sadness. "I wanted to apologize." "You don't need to apologize to me. I'm the one who brought Derek into your family." "You were manipulated by a professional con artist," Linda said firmly. "Frank and I, we chose to believe Derek over our own son. We chose to trust a stranger over Tyler, even when Tyler was trying to protect us all." Cassie gestured for Linda to sit on the couch, the same couch where she and Derek had planned their wedding, where they'd laughed about how easily they'd fooled the Morrison family into accepting them. The irony wasn't lost on either woman. "Have you heard from Tyler?" Cassie asked. Linda's face crumpled. "He came to see us 2 nights ago. He's different, Cassie. Harder, colder. He's not the son I raised." "What did he say?" "That we got exactly what we deserved. That Derek was going to prison, Morrison Construction was going to be destroyed, and our family name was going to be ruined." Linda wiped her eyes with a tissue. "He wasn't wrong." Cassie pulled out her phone and showed Linda the stream of news articles that had been appearing every day since the story broke. Morrison Construction's stock price had plummeted. Major clients were canceling contracts. The Colorado Attorney General's office had opened an investigation into the company's financial practices, looking for evidence of deeper corruption. "It's not just about Derek anymore," Cassie said. "Tyler's making sure everyone pays for choosing Derek over him." Linda looked at the headlines with the expression of someone watching her life's work burn. "Frank's talking about bankruptcy. The legal fees alone are going to destroy us, even if we're cleared of any wrongdoing. Tyler's made sure that being associated with Derek Walsh is a death sentence." A new notification popped up on Cassie's phone, an email from an unknown sender with the subject line, "Your ex-husband's final gift." Cassie opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a video file and a brief message. "Cassie, you always said Tyler was too weak to fight for what he wanted. Watch this and tell me if you still believe that. A friend." Cassie clicked play on the video file. The screen filled with security camera footage from Derek's office building, showing Derek and Tyler in what appeared to be a heated argument. The timestamp indicated it was recorded 3 days before Tyler's disappearance, meaning Tyler had confronted Derek directly before implementing his revenge plan. In the grainy black and white footage, Tyler looked calm and controlled, while Derek appeared agitated, aggressive. They couldn't hear the audio, but Derek's body language suggested he was threatening Tyler, possibly even becoming physical. Tyler simply stood there, absorbing whatever Derek was saying, then pulled out what looked like a recording device and placed it on Derek's desk. The video cut to a different angle, showing Derek's face clearly. Whatever Tyler was saying to him was having a devastating effect. Derek went from angry to terrified in the span of seconds. He reached for the recording device, but Tyler pulled it back and said something that made Derek sink into his chair like a deflated balloon. Then Tyler did something that made both women gasp. He smiled, not a cruel smile or a vengeful grin, but the satisfied expression of a chess master who'd just announced checkmate. Tyler pocketed the recording device, said something final to Derek, and walked out of the office like he owned the building. He was never weak, Linda whispered. We just never bothered to see his strength. Cassie paused the video on Tyler's face as he walked away. This wasn't the broken, bitter ex-husband she'd pitted at family dinners. This was a man who'd systematically destroyed his enemies while maintaining the perfect cover of being a victim himself. Tyler had let everyone underestimate him, while he built a revenge plot so sophisticated that his targets were still discovering new layers of their destruction. Mrs. Morrison, Cassie said carefully, what if Tyler isn't finished? What if destroying Derek was just the beginning? Linda looked up from the video with fresh tears in her eyes. Then God help us all, because the man in that video isn't going to stop until everyone who betrayed him pays the price. As if summoned by their conversation, Cassie's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler's old number. Cassie, I hope you're watching the news. Derek got 25 years without parole. Justice served. But don't think this is over. You still haven't paid for your part in destroying our marriage. Sleep well. Tyler. Cassie showed the message to Linda, who read it with growing horror. He blames me for the divorce. He thinks I'm as guilty as Derek. Are you? Linda asked quietly. Cassie considered the question honestly. She'd been unhappy in her marriage, frustrated with Tyler's dedication to work over romance, resentful of his family's expectations. When Derek had appeared with his charm and promises of excitement, she jumped at the chance to feel desired again. She convinced herself that she deserved better than Tyler's steady love, that she was entitled to passion and adventure. Yes, Cassie admitted, I am guilty. I destroyed my marriage because I wanted a fantasy more than I wanted reality. I chose Derek because he made me feel special, not because he was a better man than Tyler. Linda nodded sadly. We all chose Derek over Tyler for our own selfish reasons. And now Tyler's going to make sure we never forget what that choice cost us. As Linda prepared to leave, she turned back to Cassie with an expression of deep regret. I loved you like a daughter, you know? Even after the divorce, I thought of you as family, but I should have loved my son more. After Linda left, Cassie sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the ruins of her life and the growing certainty that Tyler's revenge was far from over. Derek was in prison, the Morrison family was destroyed, and her own reputation was in tatters. But Tyler was still out there, still planning, still punishing everyone who'd betrayed him. Cassie pulled out her laptop and began typing an email to Tyler's old address. Tyler, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't blame you. I destroyed our marriage for a fantasy, and I deserve whatever you've planned for me. But please, don't punish your parents any more than you already have. They love you, even if they chose wrong. Please come home. Cassie. She hit send, knowing the message would probably be ignored, knowing Tyler had moved beyond forgiveness into something darker and more final. But she had to try. She owed him that much, and she owed herself the chance to admit that choosing Derek over Tyler had been the worst mistake of her life. Somewhere in the shadows, Tyler Morrison was watching his enemies pay for their betrayal. The only question was whether he would ever consider the debt paid in full, or whether his thirst for revenge would consume them all. Chapter 9. Blood Runs Cold. 5 years had passed since Tyler Morrison disappeared into the Colorado night, and Denver had moved on to newer scandals, fresher tragedies. The Morrison construction fraud case had been relegated to business school case studies and cautionary tales about family loyalty. Derek Walsh had died in federal prison, officially a heart attack, though rumors persisted about the circumstances. The Morrison family name had faded from society pages and charity galas, replaced by more current symbols of wealth and influence. But Frank Morrison remembered everything. He sat in the modest apartment that had become his home after bankruptcy forced the sale of the family mansion, staring at an envelope that had arrived that morning with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Tyler, older now, standing on a beach somewhere tropical, wearing expensive clothes and the expression of a man who'd found peace through terrible means. On the back, in Tyler's neat handwriting, 5 years. Time to finish what we started. Frank's hands shook as he reached for his phone. Linda had been dead for 3 years, a stroke brought on by stress, guilt, and the slow disintegration of everything she'd held dear. She'd died believing Tyler would never forgive them, that their son was lost forever to the darkness of his own revenge. Frank had hoped she was wrong. Now he knew better. The knock on his door came at exactly 6 p.m., soft but insistent. Frank opened it to find Tyler standing in the hallway, looking like a successful businessman rather than the broken son who'd disappeared half a decade ago. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Frank's monthly rent. His hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd won every battle that mattered. "Hello, Dad." Frank stepped aside wordlessly, and Tyler entered the small apartment with the same measured calm he'd shown that last night at the family house. He looked around the sparse living room. Second-hand furniture, cheap prints on the walls, the accumulated detritus of a man who'd lost everything, with neither satisfaction nor sympathy. "You look well," Frank said, because he didn't know what else to say. "I am well. Very well, in fact." Tyler settled into the threadbare armchair like he was granting an audience. "I've been living in the Cayman Islands under the name Thomas Brennan. Real estate development, ironically enough. I made quite a fortune using the skills Derek Walsh thought he could exploit." Frank took the couch across from his son, noting the careful distance Tyler maintained. "Why are you here?" "To finish our conversation. The one we started 5 years ago." Tyler pulled out a tablet and set on the coffee table between them. "I want to show you something." The screen displayed a bank account with Frank's name and a balance that made his breath catch. $2.3 million. The Morrison construction liquidation generated more money than the lawyers told you, Tyler explained. "I bought the assets through shell companies, then sold them at market value. This is your share." Frank stared at the numbers, confused. "I don't understand. I destroyed Derek Walsh because he was a criminal who was using our family. I destroyed Morrison Construction because it had been contaminated by association with that criminal. But I never intended to leave you destitute." Tyler's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "This money comes with conditions." Frank looked up from the tablet. "What conditions?" Tyler leaned back in the chair, his expression unreadable. "You will use this money to start over. New city, new name if you prefer, new life. You will never contact me, never try to find me, never attempt to rebuild any relationship between us. In return, you can live comfortably for the rest of your days. And if I refuse?" Tyler's smile was colder than a Colorado winter. "Then you'll continue living in this apartment, working nights at the hardware store, watching your health decline while you count the cost of choosing a con artist over your own son." Frank felt tears building in his eyes. "Tyler, I know I failed you. I know I chose wrong. But you're my son. Can't we? I'm not your son." Tyler's voice cut through Frank's plea like a blade. "I stopped being your son the night you told me Derek Vaughn was more valuable to your family than I was. I stopped being your son when you chose him over your own blood." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Frank had spent 5 years hoping for redemption, for a chance to make amends, for some way to earn Tyler's forgiveness. Now he understood that Tyler hadn't disappeared to punish them. He'd disappeared because he genuinely no longer considered them family. "What about Cassie?" Frank asked desperately. "What about the others who?" "Cassie Rivera married a plumber from Nebraska 2 years ago. She works at a small-town library and volunteers at a domestic violence shelter, teaching women to recognize the signs of manipulation. She sent me a Christmas card every year, apologizing for destroying our marriage." Tyler's tone remained neutral, clinical. "I consider her debt paid." Frank thought about Linda, about her final years of guilt and regret, about how she died calling Tyler's name. Your mother. My mother chose Derek Walsh over me, just like you did. The difference is that she at least felt guilty about it. Tyler stood up, signaling that the conversation was ending. She's dead, Dad. There's no redemption for the dead. Frank looked at the bank account on the tablet, at the fortune Tyler was offering him, at the son who'd become a stranger. What if I don't want the money? What if I want to try to rebuild what we had? Tyler walked to the door, then paused and looked back with an expression of infinite sadness mixed with absolute finality. What we had was built on the assumption that blood meant something, that family loyalty was sacred, that love was unconditional. You proved all of those assumptions wrong. Tyler opened the door, then delivered his final judgment. Take the money, Dad. Start over somewhere else. Live well, die peacefully, and forget you ever had a son named Tyler Morrison. Because Tyler Morrison died 5 years ago in this city, killed by the people who should have protected him. After Tyler left, Frank sat alone in his apartment, staring at the bank account that represented both salvation and damnation. $2 million would let him live comfortably for the rest of his life. But accepting it would mean admitting that his relationship with his son was truly over, that the Morrison family was extinct, that everything he'd built and believed in had been an illusion. Frank picked up his phone and scrolled through old photos, finding pictures of Tyler as a child, playing baseball, graduating from high school, learning to drive, all the moments that had made Frank proud to be his father. The man who'd visited him tonight bore no resemblance to that hopeful young boy. Tyler had been forged in the fire of betrayal and abandonment, shaped by 5 years of exile into something harder and colder than Frank could have imagined. The apartment felt different now, like a tomb where the Morrison family had come to die. Frank looked at the tablet displaying Tyler's offer and understood that this was his son's final gift. Not just money, but freedom from the guilt that had been eating him alive for 5 years. Tyler was offering him a clean slate, a chance to start over without the weight of his failures. But acceptance would mean acknowledging that Tyler Morrison was truly dead, that the ghost who'd haunted them all these years was preparing to disappear forever. Frank would have to choose between holding on to hope for reconciliation and accepting the reality that some betrayals were unforgivable. Frank Morrison had built his life on the belief that every problem had a solution, that every relationship could be repaired, that love could overcome any obstacle. His son had just proven that some wounds never healed, that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. As dawn broke over Denver, Frank Morrison transferred $2.3 million into a new account and began researching apartments in cities where no one had ever heard the name Morrison. Tyler was right. It was time to start over, time to become someone new, time to forget that he'd ever had a son. But as he packed his few belongings and prepared to disappear into the anonymity Tyler had offered him, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, his son was watching. Not with love or hope or any desire for reconciliation, but with the cold satisfaction of a man who'd successfully erased everyone who'd betrayed him from his life. Tyler Morrison had kept his promise from 5 years ago. He'd made sure everyone who chose Derek Walsh over him paid the price for their betrayal. Frank would live comfortably for the rest of his days, but he would live alone, forgotten, carrying the knowledge that he'd traded his son's love for a con artist's approval. In the end, blood had run cold. The Morrison family was extinct, and Tyler, whatever name he used now, was free to build a new life without the burden of forgiving people who'd proven themselves unworthy of forgiveness. Justice, Tyler Morrison's way, was complete. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.